Hi, I'm Suri Crowe, and you're watching the MeidasTouch Network. And that little clip that you just saw is one that I shot when I was covering the sesquicentennial, say that 5 times, or the 150th anniversary at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, where and when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his troops to the Union Army General Ulysses S. Grant. All right, it's been about 163 years since 11 Southern states seceded from the Union rather than to accept a new president in Abraham Lincoln who wanted to abolish slavery. But in 2024, some people and politicians are still litigating what was the actual cause of the Civil War. And I wanted to talk about this subject today because history is repeating itself. And I believe it's important to examine the facts of what brings us to this moment in time in this critically important election year. All right. So a little bit of personal history. I grew up out west, and I didn't really have the appropriate grasp of proper Civil War history because honestly, it wasn't taught in the white Christian middle schools that I attended. And as I got into high school and then college, I was more interested in European history and studied it extensively in college and then abroad. But when I moved to Richmond, Virginia, many moons ago to take a TV news reporting job in the former capital city of the Confederacy, I walked in the shadows of these huge Confederate monuments, some of which, or many of which have now been removed, that loomed over me on stories that I would cover. And I could truly feel an oppression around the city of Richmond that was so strong, I decided to bolt and left for the coast only a year and a half later. So I didn't last very long there. It took several more years when I was reporting for a Sinclair station in Central Virginia as I covered that sesquicentennial that I truly grasped the root cause of the Civil War because I was reporting on it. And I bring this up because I think there are a lot of Americans who are not well educated as to why exactly we fought that war and why some say that we are fighting it again.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
Now, Nikki Haley was roundly lambasted by pretty much everyone with any knowledge of American history for forgetting to mention slavery in her response to that voter. And at another town hall recently on CNN, she tried to clean up her original awful answer when Aaron Burnett asked her about it in this clip.
I should have said slavery right off the bat. But if you grow up in South Carolina, literally in 2nd and 3rd grade, you learn about slavery. You grow up and you have, I had black friends growing up. It is a very talked about thing. We have a big history in South Carolina.
What did you make of her attempt to wrap that up, clean that up?
She was cleaning it up with a dirty rag. I mean, it wasn't a cleanup at all. It's painful. I don't get it. I think it says something about her. I think it says something about the Republican base. I think this should not be hard for a woman of color in this day and age to talk with real power and force about how awful slavery was and how important it is for us as a country to get past it and to deal with it and to confront it so we can be better.
Now, as the former Republican governor of South Carolina, it was Governor Nikki Haley, the first-generation daughter of Indian immigrants, India, a country that has had its own battles with white colonialism, who was pressured to finally push for the removal of the Confederate flag from the South Carolina state capitol grounds after 9 black parishioners were murdered in the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston by an avowed white supremacist. A tragic moment that was marked by President Obama's soulful rendering of Amazing Grace.
Sing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Nikki Haley clearly knows, she grew up in South Carolina, that South Carolina was in fact the first state to write up an article of secession from the Union, and that the sole reason behind the people of South Carolina's desire to separate was because they refused to give up slavery. 10 other southern states followed South Carolina in forming what was called the Confederate States of America over their common belief that slave ownership was a right. And here's what the South Carolina article of secession in part says, and I think it's important to read these articles of secession, that South Carolina was seceding from the Union because A, of an increasing hostility on the part of the non-slave holding states to the institution of slavery, that a geographical line has been drawn across the Union, and all the states north of that line, the Mason-Dixon line, have united in the election of a man, Abraham Lincoln, to the high office of President of the United States, whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. He is to be entrusted with the administration of the common government because he has declared that the government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free, and that the public mind must rest in the belief that slavery is in the course of ultimate extinction. Now here's an excerpt from the infamous Cornerstone speech delivered by Alexander Stephens at the time the Vice President of the Confederate States of America, just weeks before the Civil War began. In it, he wrote, quote, "Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite ideas. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." It's hard to read that. Now, Donald Trump, who was probably, I'm going to bet, has never read a book on American history, period, but he recently told his followers that he believes Abraham Lincoln should have negotiated with the Confederate States of America.
It was so horrible, but so fascinating. It was, I don't know, it was just different. I just find it, I'm so attracted to seeing it. So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you. I think you could have negotiated that. All the people died. So many people died. You know, that was the disaster. If you got hit by a bullet in the leg, you were essentially going to die.
He's so attracted to it. What a weird statement. The blood and guts of it all, the white supremacy of it. But here's the deal. Lincoln did not want to negotiate over human ownership. He was, in fact, approached it several times to compromise in order to save the Union. But Lincoln said no. Lincoln firmly believed that slavery was an abomination to God and that the Civil War was unavoidable. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln reflected on what caused the Civil War. He wrote, quote, "Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not that we be judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh." Now you know why Abraham Lincoln is considered one of the greatest presidents in American history. Now, in the many years that I've lived in and covered stories in Virginia, I have seen the Civil War reenactors. I've had many conversations with sons and daughters of the Confederate Army, with Southern apologists about what actually caused the split between the North and South. They claim that racism is over, that it's no longer a problem here. And you know, this one, well, we elected a black president. And that's the story that Nikki Haley is tiptoeing around in her desire to appease the right-wing, frankly racist voters. Here she is back in 2010 in an interview with neo-Confederates, tap dancing around the truth yet again.
I mean, again, I think that as we look in government, as we watch government, you have different sides, and I think that you see passions on different sides, and I don't think anyone does anything out of hate. I think what they do is they do things out of tradition and out of beliefs of what they believe is right. I think you had one side of the Civil War that was fighting for tradition, and I think you had another side of the Civil War that was fighting for change. You know, at the end of the day, what I think we need to remember is that, you know, everyone is supposed to have their rights. Everyone's supposed to be free.
I personally think it's really sad for Nikki Haley that it's such self-treason that she, as a woman of color, the first-generation daughter of immigrants, is betraying her own amazing history, all for her ambition. Her statement is one that's repeated by many who refuse to admit that slavery is America's original sin. That colonialism destroyed indigenous communities and native peoples across this continent. And not only do we need to own this truth, but we need leaders who are not afraid to own it too, like President Biden.
What is that poison? White supremacy. Oh, it is. It's a poison. Throughout our history, it's ripped this nation apart. It has no place in America. Not today, tomorrow, or ever. Let me say what others cannot. We must reject political violence in America.
Now, I'm sorry that it took me much longer than it should have as an educated woman to look in the mirror of America's past. My grandparents were immigrants, not slaveholders, but that doesn't excuse the fact that I still have benefited from white privilege, which is built into our institutions. And this is the truth that Nikki Haley doesn't want to admit to the Republican base. She's afraid that the truth will hurt them, little snowflakes that they are. Ron DeSantis and Republicans don't want children to learn about the truth in American history. Or worse, in the case of Donald Trump, he wants to amplify the white supremacy and the violence that is associated with it. I'm a different journalist now and a different person than I was before I opened my eyes and really learned about this ugly part of American history. I look back and I even see the way that I, as a journalist, covered stories, that in the news business, so much of it is looking through the ugly lens of white supremacy because it's institutionalized here. And that ultimately that hurts all of us. It certainly hurts women. White patriarchy is at the root and stem of the removal and attack on women's rights. Believe you me. And I hope and pray that as we move through this pivotal election year, that we start to ask ourselves, what kind of nation do I want to live in? One where the wealth equality gap is wildly different between the least of us and the teeny little percentage at the top. Once again, that is rooted in a system of white supremacy. And I hope that we ask ourselves, do I want to live in a country that oppresses and stokes fear about our differences? Or do I want to live in a nation that offers freedoms and rights to all? One that celebrates the big, beautiful melting pot of America that my grandparents immigrated to? I mean, that's a question I think we all really need to look inwardly and face as we move into our future. What kind of America do you want to live in? Anyway, I'm Suri Crowe for the MeidasTouch Network. I greatly and deeply appreciate you listening, and I hope to see you back here very soon, and I wish you all peace.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.